Today we're going to be building a login system that uses authentication and authorization from an external API that we also developed to create an administrative login system. Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of DevDrawer. Today is going to be another compilation of a pretty popular video series that we have. I have noticed that some of the videos are getting watched, but then some of them aren't. In order to fully complete the project, you need to watch all three. So I decided to go ahead and do like a compilation video so you can see them all three at the same time. Basically, this is going to be going over the series that we did where we created this JavaScript fetch system that we built an API for, where you authenticate logins, you show error messages, and then you eventually log into a dashboard, and everything's pulled from a custom simplified API that we've built in the back end. So if you like this kind of video, hit the thumbs up for me, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe. See you there. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So first thing I'm going to do is just create the structure that I need. So I've already created our index.html page, and I'm also going to be building out the CSS. So I'm going to create a SASS folder, and then inside of this I'm going to create a, let's say, login.js, and let's also create a initialize.js. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take this login.js, I'm going to put it in a new folder, and this is going to be our JS folder. So let's go ahead and move that to there. Okay, so now we kind of have our folder structure set up the way that we want it to be. So let's go ahead and start working on building out the HTML so that whenever we get to the point where we need to do the JavaScript, it won't be too difficult. So I'm just going to add an HTML5, and let's title this, let's do login, and I'm going to reference the SASS that's going to be built here. So let me go ahead and create that file, and we're just going to say style.scss, and then I'm going to watch the SASS. So it's being generated here. So we have our CSS and our min.css. So we don't really need this right now, so I'm going to go ahead and get out of that, but I do want to add a reference to that style sheet. So we're going to do link rel equals style sheet, and let's do href equals css style.min.css. So right now there's nothing in it, so it's not going to do anything, so that's fine. Let's also add a script reference. So we're going to do script defer source, and this is going to be js login.js. Okay, so that should kind of get us started. Let me go ahead and push this to the live server just so we have something on there. Let's start adding our script. So for this, we're going to have a specific CSS style that's just for the login page. So we're going to just set this as the body class to be login, and inside of that we're going to create our own container. So again, this isn't using Bootstrap, but we will be able to control this in the SASS whenever we get to that part. Alright, so let's do h2, and we're going to do class equals text center. This is going to be a login screen. Okay, and then let's add a break tag. So I'm just going to be adding a form with a username, a password, and then a login button. So let me do that real quick. So we're going to do form action. I'm going to make this redirect on success to dashboard.html, and let's do login form as the class. There we go, and let me close this so it stops wrapping. Alright, so let's create div input group and input group. Then inside of this, I want to do label class label, and this is going to be for the username, and let's just pass a username. Then let's do input, and let's do class input, and it's going to be text. The ID, we're just going to do username as well. And then finally, let's put a span that is going to be our error message. Okay, now I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it and paste it here. So for instead of username, this is now going to become password, and I'm just going to put this in a few different places that it needs. So password, and then the type of field is also going to be password. Alright, so, and let's change this to password. Alright, so I think that's all we need for the login. So now I'm just going to add in a break tag below that, and then we're going to do input type equals submit class, and we're just going to create a button class, and the value is going to be login. Actually, why am I doing input here? Button I forgot. Button class button, and let's see, type equals submit. Then we're just going to have this as login and close the button. Okay, so now we have our generic screen. So what I want to do is, inside of this login JS, I'm going to create a class that has some functions that we can call from the Initialize Js. So let's do class login, and let's build our constructor for it. So we're going to do construct, so constructor, and then we're going to pass the form and the fields, so that way the script knows what it needs to run it against. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Initialize JS just so we can actually, you know what, we're going to add that in the bottom under here. So inside of the login, we want to create this variable for the form. So we're going to do const form equals document dot query selector, and I think we called it login form, and that has to be, or needs to be a class. Okay, so now we have this constant form. So if the form is if it is set, then we want to pass these two fields for it. So we're going to do const fields equals an array, and the first one is going to be username. So username and then password. So that's going to be our const field. So it's basically we're passing these two fields, or these two variables. So also, while I'm in here, let's go ahead and do const validator equals new login, and then we're going to pass form fields. Okay, so now this will hit this for us. Now we just need to make this do something. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some variables. So we're going to do this form equals form. That way we can pass it between the functions. This fields equals fields. And then I want to create a function here that whenever it is submitted, it runs this function. So let's do validate on submit, and then that's just going to be a function. So I need to take this function and we're going to call it whenever this script is called. So this validate on submit. Okay, so inside of here, let's go ahead and add a let's do let self equals this, not left, let self equals this, and then this dot form, and then we're going to add an event listener. So add event listener, and it's going to be looking for the submit event, and then we're just going to use the shortcode for the function. Alright, so inside of this, let's go ahead and do e prevent default just so it doesn't submit the form. So e prevent default, and then I want to do a console.log just so we can see what we're getting from this form. So I want to do a console.log, and let's see, what did we name them again? Let's see, ID password. Actually, you know what? Instead of doing the console log this way and trying to pull it individually, what I'm going to do is we're going to do self, because we've already declared self. So self dot fields for each. So basically, the fields that were sent over, we're going to loop through those into a for each statement, and then we're going to pull and make it do what we want it to do from inside of this for each statement. So we're going to say for each field, no, for each, yeah, so our what is it called? Our result is going to be a field from the fields array. Okay, sorry, I'm just thinking as I'm doing it. Kind of hard to do this in real time. Okay, so for each field, fields produce a field that we can interact with. All right, so let's do const input equals document.query selector, and then we are going to pass that field to this. So we're going to do hashtag $field, and that should allow us to define this input for each one of these fields that we are passing here. So username and password, it should be get passed to hashtag username, hashtag password, which is essentially what I was going to do in the console log. Okay, so let's do input dot. All right, let's try input dot value, and I want to do a console dot log so we can see what that value is. So in this screen, I'm going to do inspect. So open up the console, and if I put in admin password, click login, we have admin password. Okay, so our JavaScript is grabbing what we want it to based on this array that we're creating, so that's good. All right, so now that we have that, we need to do some stuff with it. So the first part is, let's create another function. So underneath this validate on submit, we're going to create a function called validate fields, and then we're going to pass a field to it. And each one of these is going to be put through a basically whatever requirements we want to put on it. So in this case, we just want to make sure that they're not blank, so that way we can say that, you know, it is required. So let's go ahead and take this validate field here, and I want to, instead of my console log, I want to do if self dot validate fields, and then we're going to pass the input here. And if this is equal to false, we're going to create a number that increments, which is going to be our error. So if there's an error, then it's going to give us the ability to flag it. So we also need to define this up here. So we're going to do var error error equals 0. Okay, so now if it doesn't validate, we're going to say that it's going to increase this error, and then increasing that error is going to prevent us from displaying something. So let's go ahead and do like if error equals 0, and then let's just say console log success. So right now there is no validation that goes on, so it should technically validate just because it's not doing anything at all right now. But let's make it do something. So we have this here. So let's do if field dot value dot trim is not equal to blank. We want to run this. Now what is that? Yeah, that's equal to blank. Double equal. I'll think about this in a second. Let me write down what I want it to do. So if it is blank, we want it to display something. What do we want it to display? Let's do this dot set status, and I'm going to create this function to go along with it, and it's just going to pass a message. So we're going to do the field, what the message needs to be. So we're going to do $ field, so it uses that field, the field input, and it's going to use the label that's associated with it. So we're going to do previous element sibling dot inner text, and this is going to say cannot be blank. That's going to be our error message, and then we're just going to notate it as an error. Let's go ahead and make this double quotes so we stay concise with it. And then we're just going to return false. Okay, so now let's create this set status function. So let's come down here and do set status, and we're going to pass the field first, and then the message, and then the status. Alright, so let's create a query selector constant variable. So we're going to do const error message equals field dot parent element dot query selector, and then in the beginning we put error message as the error message class. Okay, so now we have our error message defined. Scroll down a little bit, and let's say if we have a if yeah, let's do if status equals error, then we want it to show an error message. So we're going to do field dot parent element dot query selector again. Actually, you know what? I have this constant variable here. I'll have to rewrite that again. So let's do error message. So we got error message dot inner text is going to be equal to message, and then we're going to do field dot, we're going to add a class to it. So class list dot add, and it's going to be input error. So we are going to not only show an error message, but we're also going to show a where it's like the box is red around it, so you know which specific text box is showing an error. Okay. So, all right. I think that would be good. So let's test it. So if I do login right now. Cannot read undefined reading inner text, login 30. Let's see, what did I do here? So it cannot be blank. Field dot previous element sibling, not sibling. Okay, now let's try it again. Okay, now that works. I just misspelled sibling. So if we also inspect these, we can see that now it has an input error, and then the error message is showing this information here. So what happens if we add something here, and then we go to hit? Okay, well, we don't have any validation where it's a success, so it wouldn't do anything anyway. But we can see that it is adding what we wanted to add here. So let's add in some other stuff. So right now we're checking to see if it is blank. So let's also check to see if it's not blank. We are going to run something for the password. So if the field dot type equals password, so if it equals to a password, we want to make sure that password has X amount of variables. Let me get rid of this so you can see that better. Okay, so if it is a password, then we want to check to see if it has a certain amount of variables. So let's do if field.value.length is, let's say, less than 8. We want it to show an error message. So I'm going to copy this entire block, and we're just going to rewrite that error message. So this dot set status, pretty much everything stays the same over here, but what we need to put here is must be at least 8 characters. 8 characters. And this is an error, and it's going to return false. If it is over 8 characters, let's run an else statement, and we're going to do this dot set status and then field, and then we're just going to pass a null message, but it's going to be labeled as success. Alright, so let's scroll down so you can see that. And then we're going to return, let's see, return true. And we also need to close this one off. So if it's not the password type, but it's it has a value in it, we want to go ahead and do else, and we're going to basically just return this same status because it is successful. Okay, so now let's test that out. So if we come over here and we do a login, so the password cannot be blank, so this one's no longer showing that error message. So if we do here, now it says password must be 8 characters. So if we do this, okay, I gotta make it count the actual characters. Alright, let's see what is going on here. So if it's password, if it's field type password, if it has less than 8 characters, then we set the status, return false. Otherwise, we set the status, field null success, that's correct. Set status, return true. Set status, return true. Alright, well, let's try this. Let's come down here, and since we're passing a success status, let's add one here. So if status equals success, then we want it to, let's say if error message, then we're going to have error message dot, okay, so this should remove if there's like a leftover error message inside of it. And then we're also going to come over here and say field dot class list dot remove, and then we're going to remove this input error, where did I put that at? Input error message class that we put in. We're going to remove that. Okay, so let's try this again. So if we come over here and we do this, click login. Now we get 4 characters. So that's 8 characters. All right, so now it removes itself. Okay, so now we have this. Let me just look through and see if there's anything else that we need to do. So it's going to show an error here if it's successful. If it's successful, let's go ahead and do this. We're going to do this.form.submit. And I guess I should have been looking at the console log to see if it was actually sending over this success message. But let's try this. So let's add something here. There's 4, 8. We hit login. It brings us to our dashboard. All right, so that's working. So now if we try to hit login, let's refresh. And we hit login. It won't let us do anything here because it's not letting us. Okay, that's an issue that I need to take a look at. All right, so let's look at the code. So for each error. Oh, okay. So what's happening is this error actually needs to be outside of the for each loop, because what it was doing is basically this one, if you put in the username, it was going to validate true, which would, as soon as the error equals 0. So starts off at 0, if it validates true, hits 0, exits out, comes down here. So what it was doing is, before it was able to exit out of the username being true, it was submitting the form because it didn't see any errors because it was inside of that loop. Now that it's outside of the loop, we should be able to see it actually work here. So if we hit login now, there we go. So now this can't be blank. Must be at least 8 characters. Once you have 8 characters, then it submits it. Okay. All right. So that's good to know. Yeah, I just had it in the wrong place. I think for the login class, I think that's all we need to do there. So let's come over here and start styling this to make it look a little prettier. So let's go into our style.sass, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speed run through this. So basically I'm going to create it how I want to create it. You'll be able to see it in the code that I have attached to the tutorial, but I'm not going to sit here and make you wait for me to create these styles the way that I want them to be created. So just watch as the magic of video editing happens. Okay, so through the magic of editing, the SASS is done, and basically we should be able to see all of our changes. Now it highlights it in red. Password cannot be blank, username cannot be blank. So if we change this, it goes away. Let's come over here, and I'm going to add a break tag in between these just to split them up a little bit. And if we do this and this, password must be at least 8 characters. There we go. Okay, so now we have our login screen done. Let's do some stuff with it. So whenever they go to log in, not only do we want to submit the form, but also want to potentially, this is where you would add in your login API information. So let's do login API here. Basically, once you get to this point and everything's validated out the way that you want it to be, then you can essentially just pass the username and password to your API script, get your tokens, whatever you need to do, and then if everything according to plan, you would do if whatever you need, and then submit the form, and then it passes that form to it. So whenever it does that, we also want to do local storage.setItem, and we're going to pass a auth variable of 1. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to store a application variable. So let's get rid of that. So let me just fill this out here, and we hit login. Now we're authenticated. That way we can use this authentication on this page too. So if you're not authenticated, it won't let you see this page. it'll redirect you back to the login screen, or if you want to log out, you would click a button, it would remove this application variable here. So having said that, what you would do with your API is that you would take kind of the same approach. Maybe you would save first name or last name or username, email address. Don't save the password obviously, but save the username, save the user ID, or whatever's coming back to you from that API, and then you would set it inside of these items however you want to set it so they can be used throughout the rest of your site. So speaking of the rest of our site, I'm going to now create a dashboard.html page. So we're going to do a new file, we're going to say dashboard.html, and I'm going to copy all of this over. We're going to remove this form, and we're going to also remove this body class here. And let's go ahead and change this. We're just going to say dashboard. So right now you're able to hit this page. What we want to actually do is control that a little bit better. So we have our login.js. I'm going to create another file, and this is going to be auth.js. This is going to be a very, very simple script. Basically it's going to say that if you're authenticated, great. If you're not, kick you out. So in order to hit that, I want to also be able to do something to this initialize. So in the dashboard, instead of doing login.js, we are going to do Auth Js, because we don't need that login script anymore. So let's do Auth Js, and then let's also just do our initialization script as well, because that initialization script is going to be what controls this. So let's go ahead and add some text in here. So let's do h1 class equals text center, and then welcome to the dashboard. And let's just go ahead and do p class equals text center. Then we're going to do href goes nowhere. The class is going to be logout, because this is going to be a logout link that we will again destroy this authentication application or storage variable. Okay, so let's go over to our Auth Js and write some simple script for it. So let's do class auth. Let's do our constructor. We don't need to pass anything to this constructor. So what we do need to do is create a validation script. So let's do const auth equals local storage dot get item, and then we named it auth. So now we have this constant variable that's getting brought in from our local storage. So let's do this validate auth, then we're just going to pass this. So we need to create a function called validate auth, and we need to pass in whether that is a 1 or it doesn't exist. So we're going to do if auth is not equal to 1, then we want to do window.location, so location.replace, and it's just going to basically redirect them back to the main screen, which is our login screen. Else we're going to do something here. Let's also go ahead and create the logout. So let's do logout, and we're going to do local storage. I'm just going to change this, and instead of being get item, it's going to be remove item. And then again, we want to do window location replace to make them go back to the main screen. So if I click on logout now, it's not going to do anything, but if I do go over here and remove this and refresh the page, still not going to do anything because it's not actually being called yet. So inside of this initialize.js, this is where we're going to have that magic work. So we're going to do const auth equals new auth, and this does not need to be proper case. So const auth new auth, and you see it just redirected because now it's doing exactly what it needs to do. So if we try to access that dashboard, so slash dashboard.html, you see it just kind of redirects us back to the home screen because this variable doesn't exist. But if we come in here and do auth1 and then we try to access the dashboard now, it'll let us in. So now that we know that's working, let's come in here and create something for the logout. So we're going to do document.querySelector, and we called it logout, and then we're going to add an event listener to this. So add event listener, and we're going to listen for a click, and then we're going to pass E. I don't think we'll actually use it, but let's just pass it just in case. And then we're going to do auth.logout, and that should give us the ability to come over here and click this, and it logs us out. It removes that variable. Okay, so close to being done, not quite. Just, you know, number one, we don't have anything that's validating against, so you can log in with whatever as long as it matches our criteria. But there is something that I have noticed in some of the testing that I've done for systems like this, is that even though you're not logged in, if you try to go to /dashboard, okay, well, it didn't show it there, but sometimes there's like a small glimpse of the page that you're trying to hit, which we don't want. Okay, well, it's not going to show it on this one just because I'm recording the video, but there is a way to fix it so that you don't have to worry about that in the future. So inside of our constructor, I'm going to create a document.querySelector, and I chose the right one that time. And on the body, we're going to do style.display equals none. And this will just make it where if that page does show up for a microsecond, it basically, there's nothing there. It won't be able to see anything. And it gets run before any of the other authentication stuff gets run, so it's kind of ensuring that once that page is hit, if they do see anything, it's just going to be a white flash while it's replacing it and removing it. So, having said that, we now have the body style turned off. So if we log in and it's successful, it's a blank page because we don't have it turned on. So what I want to do is, if it is authenticated, we come down here and we put this display to block. So now if it's authenticated, it shows you that actual screen, which is what we want it to do. So now if we log out, it goes back to the page that we started with. If we enter in any information here, it logs us in. If we don't enter information, it shows us these error messages, and you can show different error messages based on the input. There's also a way that you can do these on blur, so that while you're typing, it shows you an error message. However, in the logon script, because of the error validation, the way I have it set up right here, if we did it on blur, this would be kind of doing the same thing that for each did earlier, where it's going to show it as a true when it's not supposed to. So right now, that's why I have it only on validate on submit. But you can write a blur on there and then just not worry about this error message that's coming here, and just make it to where it just shows these, and then have it actually run on the submit where it actually submits the form. So you can do all that kind of stuff, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to go ahead and explain my setup a little bit, how I have everything currently set up. I am using WAMP locally just to do the server, so I'm also using WAMP's local database here, and then I have it tied into a folder on my desktop for the actual code. So right now, as you can see from the screen, there's nothing that's currently on the screen, but I'm just letting you know. So WAMP is being used at the server. You don't have to do it that way. You can follow one of my other tutorial videos where I teach you how to build your own virtual server on Linux platform. or you can also use your own web hosting, whatever it is. But this is specifically for this tutorial. I'm using WAMP just because it's very easy to come about, so most developers can use it. All right, so I think I've described this project enough. Let's go ahead and start adding some code and getting started. So inside of this folder that I've created, I'm going to create the structure that we're going to use. So the first thing I want to do is create a controllers folder, and inside of that controllers folder, that's where we're going to have like our database connection and all of our classes and stuff like that. And then I also want to create a new file, and this is going to be our Htaccess. So our Htaccess file, which I've recently done a video on what Htaccess is for and what you can do. So I'm not going to go over in detail what is actually being included in it, but you can watch that video to see if there's anything that you may not understand. Okay, so then we're also going to be using our Autoloader that, again, I created in another recent video, so you can see why we use that. And then finally, we're just going to throw on an index.php page. So now we should have something here. Good. All right, so let's first start with our autoloader. And in the autoload, we're just going to create the script. We're going to just create the script that pulls our classes. So let's do PHP. And again, this is a very simple object-oriented autoloader. So let's do function autoload. And then we're going to pass class, include, and then we're going to reference our controllers folder, and then that's where all of our classes are going to be declared. So let's see, class, and then .php. So our naming scheme has to be very similar to how we're setting it up right now. And then finally, we're going to use the PHP SPL autoload register, and then we're just going to register our autoload function. And that's it. Okay, so now that we have that done, we can switch over to our index.php, and we're just going to require that file. So require once autoload.php. Okay, so now that is done. So we need to register a database. So let's go ahead and create a database. I'm just going to call it sample API, and let's make it general, and then we're just going to create that. So now I have a database created, but there's no tables, no data or anything inside of it. So what I want to do is use PHP to create the tables, and then also to add information to those tables. So inside of my controllers folder, I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be called db.php, and this is where our database connection information is going to be reside. So let's go ahead and create a class. So we're going to call it class db, and then inside of this class, let's go ahead and do our public function. Let's do get connection, because this is where we're going to pass all of that information to. So in order to pass information to this class, this public function, let's create a few variables that'll be used. So we're going to do private, let's see, private host, then that's just going to be localhost, and let's do private, port, and I will get back to that in a minute. So not post, I'm going to do port, and then we also need to have our username, password, and database. So we're going to do private username, and then root is my WAMP username, and I believe it's not using a password at all because it's not something that's publicly available. So I'm just going to have that blanked out. Then private, let's do database underscore name, and then we just called it, what did we call it? Sample API. Alright, so let's do sample API. Okay, so let's see if this thing is running. It's running on the port 3308. This probably isn't something that you would normally have to worry about, but since I'm using WAMP and I have localhost reserved to my local private Linux virtual server, so this localhost it has its port number different just because it's WAMP and it's running after my local Linux server is running. So normally you wouldn't have to add the port, but in this instance, in my case, I do. So if you are curious, you can find your port usually by just looking at the server information here, and it'll tell you that MySQL and then the port number. So it's on my local host and then port number 3308. Okay, so let's also create one more variable. This one's going to be public because we want it to be usable throughout the rest of the application. So inside of our Git connection, we're going to be using Pdo. So let's go ahead and set up our Pdo connection information. So first thing I want to do is this con is going to be null. And then we're going to do a try catch block. So this con equals new Pdo, and then we're going to pass along our Pdo connection information. So MySQL host equals, and then this is going to be equal to this host, and then the next line is going to be our port, and then this is going to be equal kind of the same thing. So we're going to do this port, and then we're going to do db name equals this database name. So this database name, and then we're also going to pass in this username and this password. Okay, so now we have our Pdo connection. So since we're inside of a try catch block, let's go ahead and do the catch. So we're going to do catch Pdo exception, and then we're just going to create the exception variable. And if it doesn't connect for whatever reason, we're just going to echo out that it can't connect. So let's do database could not be connected. And then let's also display the exception message. So we're going to do exception get message. Okay, so that is our generic connection, and then we just need to return this connection. All right, so that is our generic class DB. Let's see. So what I need to do now is I'm going to create another controller over here, and I'm going to call it setup.php. This controller is going to control the initial setup. So it's something where we're going to use a variable that flags and says, okay, let's go ahead and run these functions. And then after they're run, you don't really have to run them again. It's basically just like filler content. So you can put in, you can create an entire database from a PHP file. So I'm just going to show you some very simple ways to do that. I don't even know if I'm going to show you all of what I'm doing in it. I'm just going to show you the generic part of it, and then I might fast forward through the rest of it, but we'll see when we get there. Okay, so we got PHP, and this is my class setup, and we want to pass in our private variable con. And then inside of our constructor for this, so we're going to do public function, let's see, construct, C-R-U-C-T, and we're going to be sending over the database information to it, and then we're going to be passing that variable. So this con equals database. So that way we can actually hit the database. So in order to utilize this, let's create something on the index.php that only calls it if we have a variable. So let's do something like if is set, and we're going to do get setup. And then I'm also going to check to see if this get setup is not only if it's set, but if it is equal to true. So that should give us a quick and easy out to be able to set up something. So now we need to call that. And since it's being loaded inside of our autoloader, we don't need to do like an include statement or anything like that because it's already been done that way. So we're going to do setup equals new setup, and then we're passing the database connection information, which we do need to add to our autoload. So inside of this, right after autoload, we're going to do database. So database equals new DB, and then we're going to pass in the database connection. So we're going to do DB equals database get connection, and that should well, yeah, I mean that should work. I was thinking about something else that for some reason it's not allowing me to like show the code, but it's not showing any errors, which means that it's hitting what I want it to. Okay, so now we're passing in our database connection information. Let's create a new function. So let's do public function, and we're going to do create tables. So this is going to create the information and our tables, and then add that information to our tables. So I want to first create a variable, an array. So we're going to do message equals blank, and this is where we're going to showcase, you know, what's happening as it's happening. So we're going to do message, and we're just going to add a new one to it, and this, we're going to start the messaging here. So let's go ahead and do something like setup start it, and then let's just add a break tag after it, and then we want to have the same thing at the very end of it. So we're going to have setup completed. Okay. Okay, so now if I go back to my index, I need to run this connection. So we're going to do I need to echo it or print it? I'm probably going to have to print it. So it's a for each. So let's create a variable. We're going to say messages equal setup, and then this is going to be create tables. Don't need to pass anything to it. And then since we're creating an array, we need to do a for each. So for each messages as message, and then we're just going to echo the message with a break tag after it. And that should do it. So now if we come back to our browser over here and we do what is it? It's setup equals true. Invalid, let's see, create tables, it's not returning anything, I don't believe. Yeah. Alright, so it's not returning anything right now, so let's go ahead and add in our return message, and that should give us the array that it's looking for here. Okay, so now we have our setup started, setup completed, so we just need to do the functionality in between that actually sets up our tables. Okay, so let's add some spacing there, and I'm going to be in this file for a little bit. So we're going to be using Pdo to create our statements here. So what I want to do is we're going to create a query, and that query is just going to be a simple create instance. So create table if not exist, and we're going to name it users because I think in the last tutorial we were, the API was going to be based on user authentication. So we're going to create a table called users, and then inside of this table I want to create a few different variables. So let's do an ID, and it's going to be not null. It's going to be an integer, and we're also going to do auto increment. And I also want to have this as a primary key. So primary key ID. Okay, so now we have our ID. It's auto increment. It can't be null. It's an integer. So let's create the other stuff that we need. So we're going to need a username because this is what they use to log in with. So a username, it's going to be a varchar 50, can't be null. Okay, let me copy this because we're going to be using this same setup a few times. Let's also pass a first name, last name, and an email address. So first name, last name, email address. So let's change this to email, change this to last name and first name. So let's give them a little bit of room to work with here. So let's do 250 instead of 50. And now let's also add a password here. So we're going to do password. It's going to be a varchar, and we're going to do 500 on this one, and it's not null. And then finally, let's pass an active and make it an integer, not null, have it default at 0. So that should give us the primary information we need for our table. So let's close it out, and we have our query now. So if we come down here, let's go ahead and create our statement. So we're going to do statement equals this con prepare, and then let's run the query. So that should create a table for us. So if we want to validate that, we can do if statement execute, if statement execute, and if it's true, we want to add another message that is going to state successfully created users table. I like to use single quotes more than double quotes. Okay, so if we have that, now we should be able to run this. And right now we can see that there is no table. So if we refresh this, it says it successfully created the users. So if we refresh this, now we have a users table. So we have a users table now, which is good. And if we hit the structure, we can see that it contains all the information that we wanted to pass. So now we can also come in here and create information and just add it directly to the database, but I also don't want to do that. I want to have PHP handle it. So one thing that we're going to have to worry about is if we refresh it again, does it create the table again? I don't think it will, because we specifically told it if it doesn't exist, which that part's important, if create table if it doesn't exist. So it shouldn't recreate that table again. So let's go in here and add some users to it. So we currently have where it's creating the users table. So I'm going to create 2 users. So I'm going to use an array, and we're just going to say users equals array, and then inside of this I want to have another array, and we're going to be passing, so we're going to be passing username, and then we're going to be passing fname, and then lname, email, and password. Okay, so that is one of our users. Let's go ahead and fill this out. So let's do the first one as admin, give them test admin, and then let's do admin@example.com, and he's going to have a password of password. Alright, so that will be our first user. I want to create another user now. And our second user, let's set up his username as test, and then they can be test person with a email of test@example. Alright. Let me go ahead and close that out so it, no? Yeah. Close it out so it eliminates that message. I don't want you to be there, I want you to be there. Okay, so now we have our two users, and we need to now loop through this user array. So we're going to do for each users as user, and then let's go ahead and create a create another script that adds these users. First thing we need to do is check to see if the users exist, and if they do, then don't do anything. So let's do a statement, and I'm going to call this one statement verify just to keep it separated from the generic statement. And this con, I wonder why my autocorrect is not working right now. So this con should be passing along information there. Well, anyway, let's do select star from users where username equals a question mark, and then that we're going to execute it and pass the information. So we're going to do statement verify execute. So statement verify execute, and then we're just going to pass in an array with the user and username. So basically this is going to just be looking through the database for each user, and it's going to see if that user already exists based on the username. This isn't something you necessarily have to do. I'm just doing it right now to kind of show you how you can prevent from your dummy data from adding multiple times, because if we didn't have this there, it would essentially run and just add and add and add, even if the usernames already exist, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of a username and a password combination. Okay. Alright, so now let's go ahead and we're executing it, we're passing the username. So let's do an if statement. So we're going to do if statement verify, and we're just going to fetch not equal to true. So if it doesn't exist, we want it to run an insert statement. So now we can do statement equals this con prepare, and then we're going to add in our SQL code here. So insert into users, and we want to insert the username, fname, lname, email, and password, and active. So we want to insert those with the values. We need to have one question mark. So I'm just going to copy and paste. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So now we have the values that we want to have inserted into the statement. So now we have our values that are going to be presented, so we're going to have to do another execute statement down here. So let's do statement, and then it's going to be execute, let's see, execute, and then we're also going to again pass an array, and inside of this array we're going to have username, and let me just copy this because a lot of it's going to be the same. So username, let me also break this down so you can see it a little bit easier. There we go. Actually, let me take this and put it after. There we go. So username, we're going to do first name, last name. So let's go ahead and do that. So we got F name and L name. Got our commas. And then we're going to have email. So email, password, and then active. And actually, we don't need to mask anything there because we're not storing any of that. Let's see, password. Okay, so for the password, if we go ahead and run it right now, it's just going to have a text-based password, which we don't want. So we're going to come in here and use the password hash function. So we're going to do password hash, and then this is going to help us create a hash, and then we're just going to use the password default. So you can use bcrypt or any of the other methods that you want to. I'm just going to be using default. It's fine for this. It's not going to go into a real world production environment, but you can just kind of use this as an example. Okay, so now we have where it'll create our users for us, but I also want to be able to display a message after it's done. So in order to do that, we need to create a variable that's going to count for us. So let's come up here, and after the successful user table, let's create a variable I, just have it as 0, and then for each successful statement execute, so I need to wrap this inside of an if statement. So we're going to do if statement execute. We're just going to add 1 to that variable. So now if the statement executes correctly, it's going to go +1, and then I want to create a message that is displayed after. So we got our for each here, so I want to get it outside of that for each loop, and we're just going to do message, let's just say inserted the I, which is going to give us a number, rows into users table. Okay. Also, we have if this statement is executed, it's saying it's successful. So let's also come back over here and say that if it's executed and it's not successful, let's also present a message here. So we're going to say failed to create users table. I think that should do it. So if we run through our setup now, so come back over here and we hit refresh, undefined method Pdo executes. So on line 49, let's see. So, well, it'd probably help if I spelled execute correctly. Let's try that again. There we go. Successfully created users table, inserted 2 rows into users table. So if we come back over here, browse this, now we have our 2 users. Alright, so that's kind of the, I know this was a long way to get to just creating a database, but what you can do is you can use this for any new tables. So if we wanted to create an additional table, we could just prepare it and create it like this, and then run this setup again, and it'll create it for us and add the users and all that kind of stuff. So it's a long way to get to that point, but I wanted to give you another way to do it compared to just creating the database manually. So now we can actually get on with kind of creating the API portion of this. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it, let's say, functions. This is going to, I mean, not a new folder. So delete that. I need to create a new file that's going to be called functions. So inside of this functions.php, it's going to be very simple. It's just going to contain some of the usable functions that we need. So let's do class, so PHP class functions, and let's go ahead and do public, so public function. I wonder why this thing is not auto writing this for me. Construct, there we go. Maybe because I'm not spelling it right. Yeah, it's a big possibility. Okay, so we have our function here. There, okay. What I want to do is we're going to be using our Htaccess file to redirect all traffic to the website to our index.php. So every file is going to be routed through this index.php, and then we're going to create a folder that creates these pages individually that we can then utilize on our simplistic API. So in order to do that, there is some stuff that we need to do in order to get that URL and let it tell us what URL we're supposed to be hitting. So let's do URL equals, I've done this plenty of times, so I'm not going to rewrite this entire thing. So I'm just going to copy and paste from some previous code that I've done that has that information in it. If you want to know more what that's about, basically we're just checking to see if it's an HTTPS server versus an HTTP server, which this one's local, so it'd be HTTP, and then it's basically just going to be parsing out the host and the request URI. And then I'm going to be passing that to a variable that I need to create called this page, and then that's going to be equal to, and then we're just going to parse out that URL. So parse URL, and we just need the path. So we're going to do PHP URL path, and then inside of this I'm also going to create this public function, or the public variable of page. Okay, so now we have where this is being constructed, it's adding where it needs to go, and I just need to create a function. So public function get page, and we're just going to return this page. Okay, so that's pretty much all we need in our functions right now. So let's go back to our Autoload, and we need to add a variable for our functions class. So we're going to do functions equals new functions, and we don't need to pass any database information or anything like that to that page, so we're not going to have to do that, but we need to modify our Htaccess file right now. And you can look at some of my previous videos for the Htaccess. Essentially this is going to be taken off the PHP extension, and then it's going to be basically rerouting everything through our index.php. So we're kind of like a simplified MVC that we're creating right now. Alright, so let's see, clicked on the wrong button on my screen. So let's go back over here, and if we don't want to run the setup, let's not run the setup. Now let's say if we click on, let's say if we want to do an authorization. So we want to do auth, let's see, what do I want to call that? No, let's not do auth. We're going to do /users/auth. So right now if we hit that, it's not breaking the site, which means our Htaccess is working. And if we come over here to our index.php and we say something like echo here, it should echo here because it's being rerouted through our index.php. So this is the direction that we're wanting it to go. So now let's create a reference to this get page, and that's going to give us the page information that we need. So let's do functions get page, and we're just going to add that over here. So let's do echo functions get page, and if we come back to our screen and refresh, we can see that we're on users auth. If we take this and change it to something else, it just echoes it out. It's not breaking anything, which is, you know, what we're wanting it to do right now. So yeah, this is doing what we want it to do. But now we want to create a an else statement here. So if it's not in setup mode, we want it to run these functions. But only if it's not in setup mode. We don't care if it does all of them with it being in setup mode. We just want it to run that one time. Now, once we get to this part, we're going to be actually using the API. So let's create a page variable, and I want to create a folder over here, and it's going to be in the base URL, and it's going to be called pages. And then inside of this pages, I'm going to create a new folder called users. So that way we can actually hit the pages that we want to hit. And then our URL based on over here, it's users authorization. So inside the users folder, let's go ahead and create a new file called auth.php. So now we have an auth.php, and now we can actually reference the page that we're going to be using based on the routing in our index.php. Okay, so let's go to if file exists, and we created the pages folder, and then we're going to be passing page, which should give us users auth, and then we're going to be adding .php to that. So if it exists, we want it to run a include. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to do include, and that should be it. So if it doesn't exist, let's just we're not going to produce anything else here, so let's just do http response code, and we're just going to say it's a 404. So we don't need to have it display anything else. And then just so it doesn't accidentally do something we don't want it to, since it is an API, we're just going to exit out of the code at this point. So right now, if we come over here and refresh this, it works. If we change this to something else, it's going to say, you know, it's a 404. So that's what we want it to do. Now, if we come over to our auth.php, we can type something like hi and refresh, and now we have it being included in the page that how we want it to be included. Okay, so let's create a controller. So I'm going to do a new file. It's going to be users.php. So inside of this users.php, we're just going to write a class. So just a simple class that uses authentication. Okay, so we're going to class users, and then inside of this we need to have our construct function. So public function construct, and then we're going to pass that db here, and then we're going to create a variable, this, my typing is really weird today, this this con equals db. Okay, and let's go ahead and create a public variable con. Okay, alright, so now inside of our auto load, let's just go ahead and create another class call, and this is going to be called users, and it's going to go to the users class, and we're going to have to pass in the database information. So let me make sure that that is correct, and that looks good to me. Okay, so for now that's the only thing we need done in our auto load, and I can also close out of some of these pages to clean it up a little bit. So right now we're only worried about the auth and the users and the index. So let's minimize this so you can see better. And inside of our users function, our users class, we need to set it up so that we can select a specific user based on a username and a password. Okay, so this should be a pretty easy function. So let's do public function auth, and we're going to pass a username and a password to there. And then we're going to be passing this as a JSON object. So let's do JSON equals array, and then let's do our statement equals this con prepare, and then we're going to do select ID, username, fname, lname. So basically we're selecting everything except for active. So we're going to do lname, email, password from users, where username equals a question mark and they're active. And I think, let me open it up real quick to see, but I think in our setup the user should be active by default, so we don't have to worry about changing that. If you want to, you can make it where active equals 1 and then have it in your database where they're not actually equal to 1. That's completely up to you. I just made them all default to active. Okay, so now we're selecting everything, and you may be wondering, why in the world are we selecting the password without sending over a password? Because right now we're just looking for a username and it's active. They could type in any username and make sure they're active. Well, that is technically true, but what we're fixing to do is run it through a password verify. In order to run it through a password verify, you need to gather that password. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So execute, and then we're just going to be passing the username for now. So username, and then we're going to do a while loop. So while row equals statement fetch, and then we only want to fetch as an associate array, because if we do fetch all by itself, it also spits out like keys. We don't care about all of that. We just want it to fetch or spit out a associative array. So we're going to do Pdo fetch a sock for associate. Okay. So we're going to do a while loop, and then this is where we're going to come in and verify the password. So we're going to do if, and this is a PHP function, so if password, so password verify, and then we're going to be passing the password that we're gathering from our function, and then row password. So once it's here and it verifies that it's the password is correct with the hash, then it will then allow it to pull back everything else. If not, then it just returns a false, or we'll make it return a false. Okay, so we're going to have JSON ID equals row ID. And if we weren't passing the password inside of our select statement, I would just do like JSON equals row, and that would be sufficient. But since we're actually comparing it to a password, I don't want that password field to bleed over into any kind of thing that can be read by humans. So we're just going to manually do this part. So we need ID, username, fname, lname, email. Okay, so we got ID, username. Then I'm just going to paste this to fname, lname, and then email, and then let's come back up here and fix this and make it username. Okay, so now we're gathering everything if the password has been converted successfully. So let's do return JSON encode, and we're just going to encode our JSON array, and otherwise we're just going to return false. So if anything fails, if it doesn't execute it, whatever it is, it's just going to return false, which will give us something that we can use inside of our authorization page. So let's open this back up and go back to our auth page. And I don't think it's actually going to do anything right now. Okay, so there's a few things that we need to do. First thing is I'm just going to set up some dummy data. We're actually going to be pulling this from an AJAX call, which I think I'm going to get into in the next tutorial. This tutorial is just setting up the API, which we're almost done with. But I think in the next tutorial, I'm actually going to show you that this is how we're going to send it from our validation and authentication JavaScript. This is what it's going to get pushed out to here. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and write something that displays on the screen here. So let's first do username equals admin, because I know that is one of them, and then I'm going to do password equals password. So this is the variables that would actually be coming over from the JavaScript call. So right now we're just going to default them to this. Alright, so let's do HTTP response code. We're going to set it up as a 200 response code first, just so that it works. And then after everything, I want to exit, just so it doesn't bleed over into anything else. Okay, so if the username and password are set, which in this case they will always be set, but in the future they will not. If they are set, then we're going to create a variable called JSON, and it's going to be equal to users authenticate, and we're going to be passing the username and the password. So let's see, password there. And if the JSON exists, we want to echo the JSON. So we're just going to echo our JSON, because that's going to be the visible portion of this API, is so that you can see what kind of information is being provided. And it's also going to work whenever we go to use the JavaScript to be able to pull it down. Okay, so if the JSON exists, that means that it validated, everything's working as expected. If it doesn't exist, let's pass in a HTTP response code of 400, saying that it's basically something went wrong, but it's not missing. So we got a 400 code, and let's do echo. We're going to do JSON encode, and let's just create an array. So the first part could be error, and then this is going to be true, and then the second part is going to be message, and let's just put the message as user account not found. And this will be information that can be used by the script. So if it pulls back an error is true, we can flag it to display an error message or something like that. But for right now, it's it's just going to be inside of the browser. Okay, so now I think that will be good for that. Let's also do an else statement here, and we're going to add in. We're not going to pass a 400 code. We're going to keep the 200 code on this. So if the username and password are blank, we still want it to return something. We just want it to return an error. And we want them to know that it is connecting to the API, so that it's not going to be freaking them out, making them think that there's a 404 happening. Because it's technically not. But we do need to have something on here that says something like you are missing information or something like that. So let's do you are missing information. Okay. Let's test it out. So I think we should be able to refresh here, and we can see that it's pulling what it should be. And if we inspect this and we go over to our network tab, and let's see, reload, we got a authorization of 200 happening, so that's what we're wanting there. But if I come over here and I change this to password 2 and we refresh, it says user account not found, and then we get that 400 error message. So that is what we're looking for. Now if we take away one of these, it should still work, but it should display the message you are missing information. So you are missing information, but it's still returning a 200. Okay, so the API part of our API is spitting out the code that we want it to. Let's change this to test and see if it pulls back the other information as well. So test person. Okay, all right, so that is what I wanted to see. And I believe this is just JSON code. Yeah, it's just written out as JSON. All right, So let's go back and put this at admin, and let me look over my notes to see if I am missing anything. I don't think so. So we got our database connection set up to install it, our users, Autoload. Yep. So I think that's it. So we've created like this logon script that uses authentication in Vanilla JS to do all of this stuff, and then we also created a simple API which returns user information that we can then use on that script. So right now they're two separate projects that they haven't been put together. So as you can see inside of my VS Code, I have the sample API project, and then I have the JS login project, which is both project folders. So we're going to be working with both of them at the same time. So I figured go ahead and get them all loaded up so we can use them. So today, let's just try to finish out this project, and let's get started. So first things first, let's go ahead and make this go live. And select JS login, so it'll go live. And I'm going to copy and paste this into our incognito mode view, because that's what I'm currently using to look at it. So I don't think it's going to be doing any kind of auto refresh or anything like that right now, but that's fine. Don't really need that. So if you remember, inside of our JS login, we have this login JS, and inside of this file, we have a specific section in here for do login API here. Right now, it's not really validating the information typed in, so we can essentially type in whatever we want. It logs us in and redirects us to a dashboard. So what we wanted to do is actually log in authenticated against this API that we've created that's returning this default information. And the reason why it's returning this information is because in the tutorial, the way that we have it set up is that we're passing admin and password, which is the admin and password username for our username and password combination for this specific account. So this is going to be something that now we're going to modify in order for this login JS to interact with this page and send over dynamic data. In order to do that, we have to modify our login JS, and then we have to modify the authenticate PHP in order for it to be able to talk to each other. So let me go ahead and start it off by, let's just go ahead and comment out what we have here so it doesn't accidentally submit the form while we're doing our code changes. So what we need to do is create some variables that are going to be coming from our username and our password fields. So I'm going to create a, let's just say variable data equals, let's do username, and then it's going to be document, let me decrease that, see document dot query selector, and then we're just going to pass username. So we're going to pass username, and then we're going to pass the value of our username. Then we're going to copy this, and we're going to paste it and pass password value as well. So now we have password and password here. Okay, so that's our data that we're going to be passing to the script to pass to the API. We're going to be using JS fetch for this. So we're going to do fetch, and then we're going to pass in its sample API. So sample API dot local, and then we're going to be hitting this specific URL that you see right here. So sample API dot local / users / auth. So that's what we're going to be adding here. So users / auth. And then from here, we're going to have to pass in the information that it's requesting. So we have our fetch here. Let's go ahead and we're going to send it over with a method post. So method, let's see, method, and this is going to be post. And then in the body, we are going to send over a JSON.stringify, and then it's going to just pass that data that we created at the top. So our variable is going to be passed here, and it's going to be passed as JSON. And then we're going to also send over some headers, which is going to send it over as a JSON content type. So content type, and then we are going to pass application slash JSON, and then our char set is going to be UTF-8. So char set equals UTF-8. Okay. I think that is it that we need for that. Okay, so now that we're in here, we want to do a once it does the fetch, we want to do a then, and then we're going to grab get the response from it. So we're going to do then response, and then with that response, we're going to basically pull the JSON for it. So we're going to do response.json. And then the next step, we're going to do another .then, and then this is going to be where the data that is being sent back to us is where we can do stuff with the data. So inside of this data, so this response is basically just sending over and receiving the response that we have, what we want. And then if it's successful, it grabs the data. It's going to then come to this section, and it's going to run through the information that we have. So let's just do a console.log, and then just console log out the data. Finally, let's do a catch. So we're going to do catch, and if it's not successful, we want it to pass the reason why it's not successful. So we're going to do console.error, and then we're just going to pass in that error of data.message, which should be coming from our, if we look in, I want to say it's our auth, we have this message here. So if it's, for some reason, if it fails, it's going to be passing in this information to us. So if that section does exist, then it's going to just pass in the data.message for us to be able to see if, what's wrong with it. Okay, so that should be all that we need to get started with this. So now if I come back over here and we refresh, and let's try to use admin password, and then we click on login. This was expected, so it's something I am expecting. We have to do some modifications to our PHP to get around the CORS blocking. But for right now, this is what we're wanting it to show us. So we got an error of failed to fetch. What's basically saying that it's trying to fetch something that it can't because there's a CORS blocking it. Even though it was a 200, it was able to hit it. It just wasn't able to actually do anything with it. So it's giving us a failed message. So now if we switch back over to our authorize.php, we need to add some variables here. So the first thing we want to do is add some headers. So these headers are going to control that CORS access for us. So we're going to do access-control-allow origin. And you could block this off. Right now I'm just going to have it pretty much wide open just because this is a sample. It's not really being used anywhere else. But you can make it do specific things, and I've went over this before in other API tutorials, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about what you should and should not do here, but basically this is kind of like wide open, so you just make sure that you are allowing access from the servers that you want to have access to it. Then we're also allowing the methods get and post. Right now I think the only thing that we're using is the post, if I'm not mistaken. I believe the fetch that we're going to be sending over was a post, but just having get on there is also something worth having. So we're also going to have allow headers, and we're going to allow all headers, again wide open, and then we want this page to have a specific type of response. So we're going to do header, and then this is going to be content, so content type application JSON, and then we're basically making this application type, the content type, the same as this one, so application JSON and then UTF-8. So I'm gonna go ahead and just retype it out. So we're gonna do char set equals UTF-8. Again, just to have that on there. And minimize this so you can see it. Okay, so now we should be able to access this API. Of course, it's not going to work because it's we're not passing anything to it, so it's still returning that default information that we were originally getting because the admin and password is hard-coded. So right now, it doesn't matter what we type in here. We can type in whatever, and it's going to return admin and the admin account. So let's go ahead and I'm going to refresh this to clear that out and refresh this, and you can also see that this now, I don't know if you were able to see it, but if you rewind the video and look, you can see that it kind of changed the format a little bit because now this is being returned as a JSON format rather than a text format. So now we are sending over this username and password as part of our body. So in order to grab that data, we want to be able to pass it here. So let's create a variable in our PHP called data, and then it's going to be JSON decode because we're sending it over as JSON decode or JSON encoded strings or arrays, and then we're going to do file get contents, and then this is just going to be a PHP input, and basically this is going to take the content that's being sent over here as part of the body, and it's just going to be like, okay, so it's being sent over as JSON and it's being received here as this PHP input. It's just something that exists as the action is being made. So we're able to grab that and then decode it, and then that should give us our data here. So let me, just to test that, I'm going to comment out everything that we have here and refresh, and I'm going to do, let's do a print R and just print the data out. So this should return a, probably not going to show anything here, but on this side, if we do admin and password, go to log in. Oh, that's because I got to do JSON encode. So we're going to do echo JSON encode. And let's try that again. There we go. So now it's saying, admin and password is being sent over. So if we change this to password 2, we hit login, now we have password 2. So that's kind of what we're looking for here. It's printing out what we want it to be printing out. So now we just got to grab those variables and push them into this default information that we currently have. Okay, so we have our username is set up here. Let's go ahead and make this a blank. So the variable is always set to a blank. And then we're going to come in here, we're going to say if is set and then data. And if that is set, then we're going to set this username. So username, and it's going to be equal to data username. And then we're also going to pass password is going to be equal to data password. So that should give us the information that we need to be able to pass to the username and password. So now if we come back over here and let's do password, it should display what we want. So let's try the other one. I think the other account was like test and password again, I think. There we go. So it's pulling the other account because it's using that information. So now if we type in a bad password, so let's do password 2, it's going to say user account not found because again that is coming over here where then it's returning a 400 error. So everything is working as expected. So let's clear this out, and we are going to now go back into our login.js and we're going to finish writing what we need to here. So right now we're just console login the data. We're going to remove this and we're going to let's see, we want to create, okay, so we have it where it's potentially sending over an error. So if it sends over an error, we want to be able to handle that. So let's do if data.error. So this is, if it hits it, then it's going to try to look to see if that account exists. If it doesn't exist, we want it to be able to show an error message. We want it to be able to show that there's a message on the form here saying that it's not a valid form or a not valid entry for username and password. So let's first do a console.error, and we're going to do error, and then we want to pass the data.message. So we also have that being logged in our console log if we want it. You don't have to do that part. I'm just going to do it so we can showcase what it is. So let's do on the index.html, I'm going to create a new what I want to do. I want to do something here that displays like I'm going to put it right above the username. So inside the form, I'm going to create a div class equals error message all. Alright, so error message all. So inside of our JavaScript, let's go back over here, we also want it to show a response to the user. So this is going to be showed in the console, but we also want it to show a response to the user themselves. So we're going to do document.query selector, and then that new the new div that we just created, which is error. So error dash message dash all, and then we're going to do style.display equals block. Okay, so that is one way to get it to show up. So now we also need to, I'm just going to copy this, and instead of doing style.display, we're going to change this to inner text, and we're just going to make it say your password or username is incorrect, please try again. And that should give us an error message if it goes wrong. So let's try the error message now. So let's just type in something and hit it. Okay, so we're getting our error. User account cannot be found. That's good. Cannot read properties of null reading style. So query selector. Oh, that's because they're classes. So let's fix that real quick. Now let's go back over here. Just type in whatever. There we go. So your password and username is incorrect. Please try again. All right, cool. So now we're getting that. But if we do type in correctly, so admin password, and nothing happens because we don't have it currently doing anything. But we do know that that part is working. So we have where this this error message displays. So let's go into our SASS, and we're going to add a style for this error message. So let me see, where would be a good place to put it at? I know we have an error message. All right, so let's do error message dash all, and we're going to do font size. Let's make it the same as the other one, so 0.85 rem. And let's see, we're going to do color, which is going to be error color. And let's do text align. Let's make it centered. And let's do margin. Let's just put like 1 rem on the top and the bottom and nothing on the left and the right. And then we're going to make it display none by default. Okay, so let me go ahead and run that SASS. So now, if we refresh, just type in something, maybe do a hard refresh. Error message all. Let me see if there's any problems with it. Watching, it's because I typed it before. Okay, there we go. Now we should be able to see that once we refresh. No. Sample API CSS style min. So we got it here, style min. Let me make sure it's hitting that. So CSS style min. style CSS. All right, let me do a hard refresh here. Should be hitting it. Why is it not hitting it? Let's inspect it. It doesn't have a style associated with it. Why? So it's class error message all. Let me just copy that just to make sure I typed it in correctly. I did. So I figured out what the issue was. So if I type in this and hit login, you see that it changes now. The issue was that whenever I was saving this SASS, because I have two folders open, so both of these folders that are open, it was basically saving it to the top root and adding CSS here. So I just took the CSS folder that it was generating here and I just drug it in here. So if I resave this, you can see that it creates this CSS folder. That's not where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go here. But that's probably because I got two folders open and I'm not dictating which folder it actually goes into. I'm just dictating that it goes into the first folder and adds it a CSS folder. So basically what you do is just take this, you can drag it down to your JS login. It's going to ask you if you want to move it and replace it, and that's all you need to do. But we don't need to watch this anymore. I believe that's the only style that we're going to add for now anyway, and I'll modify that if I need to. So let's get out of there and let's test it out again. So we got ASDF, just type in something, and then we can also verify our other stuff still working too. So password must be 8 characters. Now if it is, you can see that it's not working. If we hit admin, password, and then it's not going to do anything because we don't currently have it doing anything. So let's go over to our login.js again and close this so we can see a little bit better. And now if the data error, if that doesn't exist, let's run an else statement. So else, and then we want to then come down and do what we were doing down here. So let's copy this, and now we want to run it. And I think I'm also going to want to run and save the data that's being sent over. So let's come over here and do a local storage dot set item, and then let's just call this one user, and then it's just going to be json.stringify, and I'm just going to stringify the returned data. So there, that should do it. Now if we submit that form, it's going to set a local storage item for authentication and user, and it's going to store the information and then submit the form for us. So if we come back over here and we do admin password and we hit login, we're logged in, and if we click on our application, we can see the user is storing all the information that we have here and the authentication here. So let's go and log out. So right now that's an issue. We need to get it where when you hit logout, it removes that user variable. So inside of our, I think it's authenticate JS, so inside of this we have this logout function. So we just need to take this and we're just going to add another remove item called user, because that's what we just created. And if we come back over here, we have to log in again. So we're going to do admin and password. We're going to log in. Now if we hit log out, it removes both of them. So that's what we want. So now let's just test it by doing test user and password again. And we have the username test person, so all of that is different. So that means that it's hitting the API, it's producing what we want it to produce, and it's displaying what we want it to display. So now let's take it even a step further and make it where whenever you logged in, so we're going to do admin and password. So if you log in correctly, let's change it up a little bit here so it says something like, instead of welcome to the dashboard, let's make it say something else. Let me open up my dashboard HTML here, and instead of saying welcome to the dashboard, let's just have it say dashboard, and then right before the log out, let's have it say something like welcome, and let's do a span ID of full name, and then we're going to have it where it says your full name, and then it's going to give you, it's going to present you with a log out link. So right now it's saying welcome with nothing there. So what we need to make it do, since we're storing that information inside of our I'm going to say authenticate. Yeah, let's do our authenticate CSS. So inside of here, if everything is being authenticated, then let's go and add some text to it. So right now we have it where it's displaying the block, the body as blocks. So let's come over here and we're going to do var span username equals document dot query selector, and then we called it full name, and then what we want to do is span underscore username dot inner HTML equals user dot fname plus with a space and then user dot lname. Now we need to define this user. So up here we need to create another constant variable. So we're going to do const user equals json.parse, and then we're going to grab that local storage that we created. So local storage get item, and it's going to be user, and then inside of this validate auth we're going to pass that variable to it. So validate auth, and then we need to also call it here. So now the user should be available to us. Now it says welcome test admin. So if we log out, we do test password and hit login, we now have welcome test person. So that is pretty much it. Basically we've tied in our API to the login screen of our Vanilla JS application. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do with this. Maybe I'll get into that a little bit later. Maybe in another video I'll show you how to do some tokenization to make the security of it a little bit more secured. Right now there is no tokenization that's being passed. It's basically just username, password, or username, login information being sent over, and it's being returned. So you can use this same type of code structure to build out like internal pages or stuff like that. You know, you can make things that goes onto this dashboard, and you can make it where, you know, information coming from here is only available to people that are authenticated. So there's a whole bunch of other really cool stuff that you can do with this. This is basically creating like your own potential content management system using JavaScript. So pretty cool premise to be able to work with, but this should be able to kind of get you started on doing that. So maybe in the next video I will actually create the authentication tokens, kind of like I've done with the previous application development using an API. So I'll actually build it into Vanilla JS rather than jQuery. So maybe we can test that out next time. But for now, I think that's going to do it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something from it. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions or anything like that, let me know, and I'll try to address them as best I can. So until next video, I will talk to you later.